The morning sun cast long shadows across the military airbase as Captain Sarah Mitchell completed her pre-flight checks on the sleek F-22 Raptor. Her hands moved with practiced precision over the controls, each switch and button as familiar as her own heartbeat. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled pilots in the squadron, though some of her male colleagues still whispered doubts about women in combat roles. The base alarm suddenly pierced the quiet morning air with its urgent wail. Sarah's radio crackled to life as the control tower's voice cut through the static. "All pilots report to briefing room immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Sarah sprinted across the tarmac alongside dozens of other pilots, their boots pounding against the concrete in unison. The briefing room buzzed with tension as pilots filled every seat, their faces etched with concern and anticipation. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, stood at the front with a grim expression that Sarah had never seen before. Intelligence. "Reports indicate an imminent attack on our strategic stronghold at Mountain Ridge Base," Colonel Harrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of the situation. "Satellite imagery shows 40 enemy aircraft approaching from the northeast. They're flying in formation and will reach the stronghold within the hour." The room erupted in murmurs as pilots processed this information. Mountain Ridge Base housed critical defense systems and served as the region's primary command center. Its loss would be catastrophic for national security. "The enemy force consists of advanced fighter jets and bombers," the colonel continued. "They've planned this attack carefully, choosing a time when our main defensive squadron is deployed overseas. We have limited resources available for defense." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she studied the tactical display showing the incoming threat. The enemy had chosen their timing perfectly, catching the base at its most vulnerable moment. Most of their experienced pilots were thousands of miles away, on a training mission that had been scheduled months in advance. "We have 8 F-22 Raptors available for immediate deployment," Colonel Harrison announced. "Additionally, we have 12 F-16 Fighting Falcons and 6 older F-15 Eagles. Against 40 incoming aircraft, our odds are challenging, but we must defend Mountain Ridge Base at all costs." The briefing continued with detailed analysis of enemy aircraft types, probable attack patterns, and defensive strategies. Sarah absorbed every piece of information, her mind already calculating flight paths and engagement scenarios. She had trained for situations like this, but the reality felt surreal. As pilots filed out to prepare for takeoff, Sarah noticed some of the veteran pilots exchanging worried glances. Captain Mark Rodriguez, a pilot with 15 years of experience, approached her with a concerned expression. "Sarah, I've never seen an attack force this large," he said quietly. 40 aircraft is practically an invasion. The brass is sending us up against impossible odds." Sarah nodded, understanding his concern but feeling a surge of determination. "Impossible odds just mean we have to be better than we've ever been before," she replied. "Those people at Mountain Ridge are counting on us." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah suited up in her flight gear, double-checking every piece of equipment. The weight of her helmet felt heavier than usual, and her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the straps. This would be her first real combat mission, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Ground crews worked frantically to prepare the aircraft, loading missiles and checking fuel levels. The base had transformed from its usual calm efficiency into a hive of urgent activity. Mechanics shouted instructions over the roar of jet engines warming up, while ground personnel cleared the runways for immediate takeoff. Sarah climbed into her F-22's cockpit and began the startup sequence. The aircraft's systems hummed to life. Around her, displays flickering on to show weapon status, fuel levels, and radar information, she ran through her mental checklist one final time, ensuring everything was perfect. "Thunder Squadron, this is Control Tower." The radio crackled. "You are cleared for immediate takeoff. Enemy aircraft are now 45 minutes from target. Proceed to Waypoint Alpha and await further instructions." One by one, the defending aircraft roared down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky. Sarah felt the familiar rush of acceleration as her F-22 climbed steeply, its powerful engines pushing her back into her seat. Below, the base grew smaller until it became just another geometric pattern on the landscape. As the defensive formation climbed to cruising altitude, Sarah could see the other aircraft spread out around her. The mixed group of F-22s, F-16s, and F-15s looked small against the vast sky, and the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were outnumbered nearly 2-to-1 by an enemy force that had planned this attack carefully. "Thunder leader to all aircraft," Colonel Harrison's voice came through the radio. He was leading the mission personally, flying the lead F-22. "Remember your training and stay focused. We have one advantage the enemy doesn't expect. We're fighting to protect our home." Sarah checked her radar display and saw the first faint contacts appearing at the edge of detection range. The enemy formation was massive, stretching across several miles of sky as it approached the stronghold. Her heart pounded as she realized this was really happening. The defensive aircraft took their positions in a spread formation designed to maximize their coverage while allowing for mutual support. Sarah found herself on the right flank, responsible for intercepting any aircraft that tried to break through on that side. As the distance closed between the two forces, tension filled the radio frequencies. Pilots called out radar contacts and confirmed their weapons were armed and ready. Sarah's F-22 felt alive beneath her, its advanced systems tracking multiple targets simultaneously. "All aircraft, this is Thunder Leader," Colonel Harrison announced. "Enemy formation is 20 miles out and closing fast. Weapons free. Repeat, weapons free. Defend the stronghold at all costs." Sarah took a deep breath and prepared for the fight of her life. In the distance, she could see the dark specks of enemy aircraft growing larger against the horizon. The battle for Mountain Ridge Base was about to begin, and the outcome would depend on the skill and courage of the small group of defenders rising to meet an overwhelming force. The stage was set for an aerial battle that would test every pilot to their absolute limits. The enemy formation appeared on the horizon like a dark cloud, 40 aircraft spread across the sky in perfect attack formation. Sarah's radar screen lit up with contacts as the advanced systems of her F-22 began tracking multiple targets simultaneously. Each blip on the screen represented a deadly threat racing toward Mountain Ridge Base at over 500 miles per hour. "Contact bearing 090. Multiple bogeys," Captain Rodriguez reported over the radio. His voice remained steady despite the overwhelming odds they faced. "I count at least 12 fighters in the lead element." Sarah gripped her flight controls tighter as she watched the tactical display update in real time. The enemy had organized their attack brilliantly, with fast interceptors leading the charge followed by heavily armed bombers. Behind them flew electronic warfare aircraft designed to jam communications and radar systems. "Thunder Squadron, break into attack pairs," Colonel Harrison commanded. "Alpha Flight, take the northern group. Bravo Flight, engage the center formation. Charlie Flight, stop those bombers from reaching the target." The defensive formation split apart as pilots maneuvered into their assigned attack positions. Sarah found herself paired with Captain Lisa Chen, an experienced F-16 pilot who had served 3 combat tours overseas. Despite flying an older aircraft, Chen had earned respect throughout the squadron for her tactical brilliance and steady nerves under pressure. "Storm 2, this is Storm 1, Sarah called to her wingman using their tactical call signs. "I have 6 bogeys bearing 105 degrees. Range 15 miles and closing fast." "Copy Storm 1, Chen replied calmly. "I see them on radar. Looks like they're trying to flank us from the southeast." As the two formations closed on each other, Sarah could make out individual aircraft through her cockpit canopy. The enemy fighters were sleek, modern jets that appeared to be top-of-the-line equipment. This wasn't some ragtag force using outdated hardware. These were professional military pilots flying advanced aircraft in a carefully planned operation. The first missiles streaked across the sky as both sides engaged simultaneously. White contrails marked the paths of air-to-air missiles as they raced toward their targets at several times the speed of sound. Sarah's threat warning system immediately began beeping as enemy radar locked onto her aircraft. "Storm 1, I'm being painted by enemy radar," she reported while throwing her F-22 into a sharp turn to avoid an incoming missile. Going defensive. The F-22's stealth capabilities made it difficult to track, but at close range, even radar-absorbing materials couldn't provide complete invisibility. Sarah dove toward the ground while releasing chaff and flares to confuse enemy missiles. Behind her, an enemy air-to-air missile exploded harmlessly as it lost lock on her aircraft. "Good evasion, Storm 1, Chen called out. "I'm engaging the lead fighter. Cover my 6. Sarah pulled her aircraft around in a tight circle and acquired the enemy fighter that was pursuing her wingman. The F-22's advanced fire control system painted a targeting box around the hostile aircraft as Sarah lined up for a shot. Her finger moved to the weapons release button as all her training came together in this critical moment. Fox 2, Sarah called out as she launched a heat-seeking missile at the enemy fighter. The weapon separated from her aircraft and immediately began tracking the hot exhaust from the enemy jet's engines. The enemy pilot reacted quickly, rolling his aircraft inverted and diving toward the ground while releasing defensive flares. However, the modern missile's guidance system was too advanced to be fooled by simple countermeasures. The warhead detonated just behind the enemy fighter's left wing, sending pieces of metal spinning through the air as the aircraft broke apart. Splash 1, Sarah reported, using pilot terminology for a confirmed kill. Storm 2, you're clear to engage. Around them, the aerial battle had erupted into complete chaos. Aircraft twisted and turned through three-dimensional space as pilots fought for position and survival. Radio communications filled with urgent calls as friendly aircraft engaged multiple targets while trying to coordinate their defense. Thunder Leader, this is Bravo 3, came an urgent voice over the radio. I'm hit and losing hydraulics. Attempting to make it back to base. Copy Bravo 3, Colonel Harrison responded. Emergency services are standing by. Sarah looked around and saw one of the F-15 Eagles streaming black smoke as it limped away from the battle. The pilot was clearly struggling to maintain control of his damaged aircraft. The enemy attack was already taking its toll on the small defensive force. Storm 1, we have 4 more bogies coming in from the west, Chen reported. They're trying to use the mountains for cover. Sarah banked her aircraft around and immediately spotted the new threat. 4 enemy fighters were flying low between the mountain peaks, using the terrain to mask their approach to Mountain Ridge Base. If they weren't stopped, they would have a clear run at the critical facility. I see them, Sarah replied. These guys are good. They're using classic low-altitude penetration tactics. The enemy fighters suddenly popped up from behind a ridgeline and began climbing rapidly toward the stronghold. Sarah realized they only had seconds before these aircraft would be in position to attack the base's defensive systems. Without hesitation, Sarah pushed her throttles to full afterburner and dove toward the enemy formation. The F-22's twin engines roared as they generated maximum thrust, pressing her back into her ejection seat. Her aircraft accelerated past the speed of sound as she closed the distance to the enemy fighters. Storm 1, you're going too fast, Chen warned over the radio. You'll overshoot the target. Sarah knew her wingman was right, but she also knew this was their only chance to stop this particular group of attackers. The enemy fighters were already beginning their attack run on Mountain Ridge Base, and every second counted. Negative Storm 2, Sarah replied as she lined up behind the trailing enemy aircraft. I have a clear shot. The enemy pilot must have spotted Sarah's approach because he suddenly rolled his aircraft hard to the right while pulling into a steep climb. However, the F-22's superior maneuverability allowed Sarah to match the turn and maintain her advantage. Her targeting system locked onto the enemy fighter as Sarah fired another missile. This time the enemy pilot had no time to react before the warhead found its target. The fighter exploded in a brilliant orange fireball that lit up the mountain valley. Splash 2, Sarah reported, but there was no time to celebrate. The other 3 enemy fighters were still heading for Mountain Ridge Base, and she was now out of position to intercept them. Suddenly, Captain Chen's F-16 flashed past Sarah's canopy, heading straight for the remaining attackers despite being outnumbered 3-1. Sarah realized her wingman was sacrificing her own safety to protect the stronghold. Captain Chen's F-16 screamed through the mountain valley as she engaged 3 enemy fighters simultaneously. Sarah watched in horror as her wingman disappeared behind a ridge, pursued by the superior enemy aircraft. Radio chatter filled with urgent calls as other defensive pairs found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers. Thunder Leader, this is Storm 1, Sarah called desperately. Storm 2 is engaging multiple bogies in Sector 7. She needs immediate support. Negative Storm 1, Colonel Harrison replied grimly. All aircraft are engaged. You'll have to handle your sector alone. Sarah realized the terrible mathematics of aerial combat were working against them. With 40 enemy aircraft attacking simultaneously, the small defensive force was being stretched beyond its breaking point. Each pilot was facing multiple opponents while trying to protect different approaches to Mountain Ridge Base. The sound of explosions echoed across the mountains as Sarah climbed back toward the main battle. Through her canopy, she could see aircraft twisted in deadly spirals of combat throughout the sky. Smoke trails marked where missiles had found their targets, and burning wreckage dotted the landscape below. "Mayday, Mayday!" came a panicked voice over the emergency frequency. "This is Eagle 4, I'm hit and going down. Repeat, I'm going down." Sarah looked toward the source of the transmission and saw an F-15 Eagle spinning out of control with one wing missing. The pilot ejected just before his aircraft slammed into a mountainside in a massive fireball. His parachute drifted slowly toward the ground as enemy fighters continued their attack. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah's radar display showed enemy aircraft breaking through their defensive perimeter from multiple directions. Some groups were heading directly for Mountain Ridge Base, while others seemed to be targeting the defending aircraft themselves. "Storm 1, this is Control," came a new voice on the radio. "Enemy bombers are approaching the Stronghold from bearing 270. You're the closest interceptor. Can you engage?" Sarah immediately turned toward the new threat and pushed her throttles forward. Through the chaos of the aerial battle, she could see 4 large aircraft flying in formation toward Mountain Ridge Base. These were the heavy bombers carrying the weapons that could destroy the critical facility. "Control, this is Storm 1, Sarah replied while accelerating toward the bombers. "I'm engaging the bomber formation. Be advised, they probably have fighter escort." As if summoned by her words, 2 enemy fighters appeared on Sarah's radar scope. They had positioned themselves between her aircraft and the bombers, creating a protective screen for the attack aircraft. Sarah would have to fight through the escorts before she could reach the primary targets. The enemy fighters turned toward Sarah's approaching F-22, their pilots clearly intent on stopping her from reaching the bombers. Sarah found herself alone against multiple opponents while racing against time to prevent the destruction of Mountain Ridge Base. "Come on," Sarah whispered to herself as she checked her remaining missiles. She had 4 air-to-air weapons left, which meant she needed to make every shot count against 6 enemy aircraft. The first enemy fighter fired 2 missiles at extreme range, probably hoping to force Sarah into defensive maneuvering that would slow her approach. Sarah stayed on course until the last possible second, before rolling her aircraft inverted and diving toward the ground. The enemy missiles streaked overhead as she evaded them with minimal course deviation. "Fox 2, Sarah called as she fired back at the same fighter. Her missile tracked true and found its target, sending the enemy aircraft tumbling toward the ground in flames. Splash 3. The second escort fighter immediately engaged Sarah in a turning fight, both aircraft pulling high G-forces as they spiraled around each other. Sarah felt the crushing weight of acceleration pressing her into her seat as she fought to gain position on her opponent. The enemy pilot was skilled and experienced, using every trick in aerial combat to gain an advantage. For several crucial minutes, the 2 fighters twisted through the sky in a deadly ballet as each pilot sought the split-second opportunity that would determine the outcome. Sarah realized that while she was engaged in this dogfight, the bombers were getting closer to Mountain Ridge Base. She could see them in the distance, flying steadily toward their target while their remaining escort fighter provided cover. "I have to end this now," Sarah muttered as she made a desperate decision. Instead of continuing the turning fight, Sarah pulled her F-22 into a vertical climb while the enemy fighter was turning the opposite direction. The maneuver left her temporarily vulnerable, but it also gave her the altitude advantage she needed. As the enemy pilot realized what was happening and tried to follow her climb, Sarah rolled over the top and came down behind him with a perfect firing solution. Her next missile hit the fighter before the pilot could react, eliminating the second escort. "Splash 4, Sarah reported breathlessly, engaging the bombers. The 4 remaining enemy aircraft were now less than 10 miles from Mountain Ridge Base. Sarah could see the massive facility nestled between mountain peaks, its radar arrays and communication towers making it an obvious target. If those bombers reached their release point, nothing would survive the attack. Sarah dove toward the bomber formation at maximum speed, her F-22 streaking through the sky like a missile itself. The enemy aircraft were flying in a tight formation that would make them difficult to engage individually, but it also meant a single well-placed shot might damage multiple targets. As she closed to firing range, Sarah suddenly noticed something that made her blood run cold. These weren't ordinary bombers. They were carrying external weapons that looked like cruise missiles. Instead of having to overfly Mountain Ridge Base to attack it, They could launch their weapons from long range and turn away. "Control, this is Storm 1, Sarah called urgently. "Enemy bombers are carrying standoff weapons. They don't need to reach the target to attack it." "Copy Storm 1, came the reply from Mountain Ridge Base. "How long do we have?" Sarah quickly calculated the distance and speed of the approaching bombers. Less than 2 minutes before they reached launch range. The lead bomber suddenly began to turn, positioning itself for the attack run. Sarah realized she was out of time for careful tactics. She would have to attack the entire formation head-on, flying directly into their defensive fire. Fox 2, Sarah called as she fired 2 missiles simultaneously at the lead and second bombers. Both weapons tracked toward their targets as Sarah continued her high-speed approach. The enemy bombers immediately began taking evasive action, but their large size and heavy weapon loads made them much less maneuverable than fighter aircraft. Sarah's first missile struck the lead bomber in the center fuselage, causing a massive explosion that consumed the entire aircraft. Her second missile damaged the wing of another bomber, sending it into an uncontrolled roll that ended when it crashed into a mountain peak. 2 enemy aircraft destroyed, but 2 more were still approaching launch position. Sarah pulled up sharply to avoid flying through the debris of the destroyed bombers, then rolled over to engage the remaining threats. However, she was now dangerously close to the enemy formation, and the surviving bombers had defensive gun turrets that were already firing at her aircraft. Tracer rounds streaked past Sarah's canopy as she maneuvered to avoid the defensive fire while setting up for another attack. The enemy gunners were skilled and determined, filling the sky with bullets as they tried to bring down the lone interceptor. One of the remaining bombers suddenly opened its bomb bay doors, revealing the cruise missile that would destroy Mountain Ridge Base. The cruise missile dropped from the bomber's belly like a deadly arrow, its engine igniting as it began its programmed flight toward Mountain Ridge Base. Sarah watched in horror as the weapon accelerated away from the launch aircraft, knowing that once it reached full speed, nothing could stop it from reaching its target. Missile launch, Sarah called over the radio. "Cruise missile inbound to Mountain Ridge Base." "Control copies," came the urgent reply from the base. "Activating point defense systems." "Storm 1, can you intercept the missile?" Sarah immediately changed course to pursue the cruise missile, but she realized the mathematics were working against her. The weapon had a significant head start and was designed to fly at low altitude where it would be difficult to track and engage. Her F-22 was faster, but catching up would take precious time. Behind her, the remaining enemy bombers were turning away after completing their attack run. The surviving enemy fighter escorts were regrouping to provide cover for the withdrawal. Sarah faced a terrible choice: pursue the cruise missile that threatened Mountain Ridge Base, or engage the remaining bombers before they could launch additional weapons. "Thunder Leader, this is Storm 1, Sarah called to Colonel Harrison. "I need immediate support. Multiple enemy aircraft are still in attack position." "Storm 1, this is Thunder Leader," came the reply. Colonel Harrison's voice sounded strained and tired. "I'm engaged with 6 bogies over Sector 3. Bravo flight is down to 2 aircraft. You're on your own." The reality of their situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The defensive mission was failing despite the courage and skill of every pilot involved. The enemy had simply brought too many aircraft for the small defensive force to handle. Sarah made her decision and dove toward the cruise missile, pushing her F-22 to its absolute limits. The ground rushed past beneath her as she flew barely 50 feet above the mountain peaks, following the missile's programmed flight path toward the base. The cruise missile was a difficult target, smaller than a fighter aircraft and flying an erratic course designed to avoid defensive systems. Sarah's radar struggled to maintain a lock on the weapon as it twisted between mountain valleys and over ridge lines. Come on, Sarah muttered as she gradually closed the distance to the missile. Her targeting system finally achieved a solid lock as the weapon climbed over a particularly tall peak. "Fox 2, Sarah called as she fired her next-to-last air-to-air missile at the cruise missile. The weapon streaked away from her aircraft, its guidance system working to intercept the incoming threat to Mountain Ridge Base. For several agonizing seconds, Sarah watched the missile close on its target. The cruise missile tried to maneuver away, but its evasion capabilities were limited compared to a manned aircraft. Sarah's missile struck the weapon just as it began its final attack dive, detonating both warheads in a spectacular explosion that lit up the entire valley. "Splash 1 cruise missile," Sarah reported with relief. "Threat to Mountain Ridge Base neutralized." However, her celebration was short-lived as her radar detected new contacts approaching from the north. More enemy aircraft were joining the attack, apparently held in reserve for a second wave. Sarah realized this had been a carefully planned operation with multiple phases designed to overwhelm the defenders. All aircraft came an urgent broadcast from Mountain Ridge Base. Second wave incoming from bearing 010. Count 20 plus additional bogies. Sarah felt her heart sink as she absorbed this information. The defending force had already been pushed to its breaking point by the first wave of attackers. A second wave of 20 aircraft would be impossible to stop with their remaining resources. Control, this is Storm 1, Sarah called. What's the status of our defensive aircraft? Storm 1, we have 4 F-22s still operational. 3 F-16s and 1 F-15, came the reply. Multiple aircraft have returned to base with battle damage. 8 aircraft against 20 fresh attackers, after the surviving defenders had already expended most of their missiles and fuel fighting the first wave. Sarah ran the numbers in her head and realized they were facing annihilation unless something changed dramatically. Thunder Leader, this is Storm 1, Sarah called to Colonel Harrison. Recommend we consolidate all remaining aircraft for a coordinated defense. Negative, Storm 1, Colonel Harrison replied. Enemy has split their second wave into 3 groups attacking from different directions. We have to spread out to cover all approaches. Sarah understood the tactical logic, but she also knew that dividing their already small force would make each pilot vulnerable to being overwhelmed by multiple attackers. The enemy commander was using classic tactics to defeat a smaller force. As she climbed back toward the main battle area, Sarah could see the scope of destruction from the first engagement. Smoke columns rose from multiple crash sites where aircraft from both sides had gone down. The mountain valleys were littered with wreckage, marking the path of the aerial battle. Storm 1, this is Control, came a new voice on the radio. We're tracking a single enemy aircraft heading directly for your position. Appears to be one of their top pilots looking for a fight. Sarah immediately began scanning the sky around her, looking for the approaching threat. Her radar picked up a contact bearing down on her from high altitude. A single enemy fighter diving at maximum speed with clear hostile intent. I see him, Sarah replied, as she turned to meet the challenge. Single bogey, bearing 095 high and fast. The enemy fighter rolled inverted and pulled into a steep dive, obviously hoping to use its altitude advantage to set up a high-speed attack pass. Sarah recognized the tactic as something an experienced pilot would use. Convert altitude into speed for a quick attack, then climb back up for another pass. Instead of turning away or trying to evade, Sarah pulled her F-22 into a steep climb to meet the enemy head-on. The 2 aircraft raced toward each other at combined closing speed of over 1,500 miles per hour, each pilot waiting for the perfect moment to fire. At the last possible second, both pilots fired simultaneously. 2 missiles streaked between the aircraft as they flashed past each other with only feet to spare. Sarah felt her F-22 shudder as the enemy's missile detonated close enough to cause damage, while her own weapon tracked the enemy fighter as it climbed away. I'm hit, Sarah called over the radio as warning lights illuminated her instrument panel. Lost hydraulics in the flight control system. Aircraft is still flyable but degraded. Her missile found its target a moment later and the enemy fighter disintegrated in a massive explosion. Sarah had achieved another kill, but her aircraft was now damaged and operating with reduced capability. Splash 5, Sarah reported grimly. But I'm running low on missiles and my bird is hurt. Sarah checked her weapons display and confirmed her worst fears. She had 1 air-to-air missile remaining, and her aircraft's damaged systems were affecting its performance. Meanwhile, the second wave of enemy aircraft was approaching Mountain Ridge Base with overwhelming numbers. The radio crackled with urgent transmissions as the remaining defensive aircraft attempted to coordinate their response to the new threat. Sarah could hear the tension in every pilot's voice as they prepared for what might be their final battle. The second wave of enemy aircraft appeared on the horizon like a storm front. Their formation spread across miles of sky as they approached Mountain Ridge Base from 3 different directions. Sarah counted at least 22 aircraft, including fighters, bombers, and electronic warfare planes designed to jam communications and radar systems. Her damaged F-22 struggled to maintain altitude as hydraulic fluid leaked from damaged systems. The flight controls felt sluggish and unresponsive, requiring constant attention to keep the aircraft stable. Sarah knew she was flying a wounded bird that might not survive another engagement. All remaining aircraft, this is Thunder Leader. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled over the radio. Form up on me for final defensive line. We make our stand here. Sarah looked around and saw the pitiful remnants of their defensive force struggling to assemble into formation. Besides her own damaged aircraft, only 7 other planes remained operational. Several showed visible battle damage, and she could hear the strain in every pilot's voice over the radio. Captain Rodriguez's F-16 had a large hole in its left wing, where shrapnel had torn through the aluminum skin. Lieutenant Williams was flying an F-15 Eagle with only one engine operating after taking a missile hit during the first wave. Even Colonel Harrison's lead F-22 showed scorch marks along its fuselage from a near-miss explosion. Control, this is Thunder Leader, Colonel Harrison called to Mountain Ridge Base. We have 8 aircraft remaining against 20-plus incoming hostiles. Request immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel from the facility. Thunder Leader, this is Control, came the reply from the base commander. Negative on evacuation. This facility cannot fall into enemy hands under any circumstances. Defend the base to the last aircraft if necessary. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the full implications of those orders. Mountain Ridge Base contained classified defense systems and intelligence information that would compromise national security if captured. The small group of remaining pilots had been ordered to fight to the death if necessary. The enemy formation began to separate as it approached the target area, splitting into 3 groups just as Colonel Harrison had predicted. The largest group, consisting of 12 aircraft, headed directly for Mountain Ridge Base. A second group of 6 fighters moved to intercept the defending aircraft, while 4 more aircraft positioned themselves to cut off any retreat. Thunder Squadron, this is Thunder Leader, Colonel Harrison announced grimly. Alpha Flight will engage the main attack group. Bravo Flight takes the interceptors. Charlie Flight, you're with me. We'll stop anyone who breaks through. Sarah found herself assigned to Alpha Flight along with Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Williams. 3 damaged aircraft against 12 fresh enemies. The mathematics of survival looked impossible. Alpha Flight, follow me, Sarah called as she turned toward the main enemy formation. Her damaged aircraft protested the sharp turn, but she forced it to respond. We need to break up their attack formation before they reach the base. The 3 defending aircraft dove toward the larger enemy group, their pilots knowing this would likely be their final mission. Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her as she accepted what was about to happen. Fear gave way to professional focus as all her training came together in this critical moment. Alpha 1, I have 12 bogies in tight formation, Rodriguez reported. They're flying mutual support tactics. This is going to be tough. Copy Alpha 2, Sarah replied. We hit them head on and try to scatter the formation. Don't try to engage individually. We need to break up their coordinated attack. The enemy aircraft maintained their tight formation as the 3 defenders approached, obviously confident that their superior numbers would carry the day. Sarah could see the enemy pilots through their canopies, professional aviators who had trained for this mission just as extensively as the defenders. At maximum missile range, Sarah fired her last air-to-air weapon at the lead enemy aircraft. The missile tracked true and struck its target, causing a massive explosion that forced the other enemy aircraft to break formation to avoid the debris. Fox 2, Splash 6, Sarah called. Enemy formation is breaking up. However, her small victory was short-lived as the remaining 11 enemy aircraft immediately split into smaller groups and began engaging the defenders from multiple angles. Sarah suddenly found herself under attack by 4 different aircraft simultaneously. Alpha 1, you've got multiple bandits on your 6, Rodriguez called urgently. I'm trying to get to you, but I'm engaged with 3 of my own. Sarah threw her damaged F-22 into a series of desperate evasive maneuvers, rolling and diving to avoid the incoming missiles. Her aircraft's compromised flight controls made every maneuver a struggle, and she could feel the airplane trying to depart controlled flight. 2 enemy missiles exploded close enough to shower her aircraft with shrapnel, knocking out several instruments and cracking her canopy. Warning alarms blared in her cockpit as multiple systems began to fail simultaneously. Alpha 1 is hit, Sarah reported as she fought to maintain control. Aircraft is severely damaged but still flying. Through her damaged canopy, Sarah could see Lieutenant Williams's F-15 Eagle spinning toward the ground with its tail section missing. The pilot ejected just before impact, his parachute opening as his aircraft exploded against a mountainside below. Alpha 3 is down, Rodriguez called grimly. It's just you and me now, Sarah. The two surviving defenders found themselves surrounded by 10 enemy aircraft, all of whom were closing in for the kill. Sarah realized her F-22 was too damaged to outmaneuver the enemy fighters, and she was completely out of missiles. Alpha 2, this is Alpha 1, Sarah called to Rodriguez. My bird is finished. I'm going to ram the lead bomber. Negative Alpha 1, Rodriguez replied immediately. There has to be another way. Sarah looked ahead and saw the enemy bombers approaching Mountain Ridge Base, their bomb bay doors already opening to reveal the devastating weapons inside. Once those bombs were released, the critical facility would be destroyed regardless of what happened to the attacking aircraft. Alpha 2, there is no other way, Sarah said calmly. Tell my family I died doing my job. Sarah pushed her throttles to full afterburner and aimed her crippled F-22 directly at the nearest enemy bomber. The massive aircraft grew larger in her damaged windscreen as she closed the distance at maximum speed. Control, this is Alpha 1, Sarah called over the radio. Ramming attack on enemy bomber. Clear the area. The enemy bomber pilot spotted Sarah's approach and tried to take evasive action, but the large aircraft was too slow. The enemy bomber pilot spotted Sarah's approach and tried to take evasive action, but the large aircraft was too slow and heavy to avoid the incoming F-22. Sarah could see the panic in the bomber crew's faces as they realized what was about to happen. At the last second, Sarah made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of ramming the bomber directly, she pulled up sharply and ejected from her aircraft just as it passed over the enemy plane. Her F-22 continued forward and slammed into the bomber's right wing, causing both aircraft to explode in a massive fireball. Sarah's parachute opened automatically as she fell through the debris field, pieces of burning metal spinning past her in the mountain air. Below, the wreckage of both aircraft scattered across the valley floor, in a scene of total destruction. Alpha 1 ejected successfully, came Rodriguez's voice over her survival radio. I see your chute. You crazy woman, I thought you were going to kill yourself. Not today, Sarah replied as she drifted toward the ground. How many enemy aircraft are left? 9 bogies still attacking the base, Rodriguez reported grimly. And I'm down to my last missile. As Sarah descended under her parachute, she watched the final phase of the battle unfold below. The remaining enemy aircraft pressed their attack despite the loss of one of their bombers, clearly determined to complete their mission at any cost. Mountain Ridge Base's point defense systems engaged the incoming aircraft with surface-to-air missiles and automatic cannons. Bright streaks of tracer fire lit up the sky as the base's gunners fought desperately to stop the attack. 2 more enemy aircraft fell to the base's defensive systems, but the remaining 7 fighters and bombers broke through the defensive perimeter and began their final attack run. Sarah watched helplessly as bombs and missiles rained down on the critical facility. Explosions erupted across Mountain Ridge Base as enemy weapons found their targets. Radar towers collapsed in twisted heaps of metal, and command buildings disappeared in clouds of smoke and debris. It appeared the enemy attack had succeeded despite the desperate defense. However, Sarah noticed something strange as she continued to descend. The explosions at Mountain Ridge Base looked wrong somehow, too small and contained. Then she realized what was happening. Control, this is Alpha 1, Sarah called on her survival radio. Those aren't the real targets being hit. You moved the critical systems, didn't you? Alpha 1, this is Control, came the reply from the base commander. Affirmative. All essential systems were relocated to underground bunkers 3 hours ago. What they're bombing is empty buildings and decoy equipment. Sarah felt a surge of elation as she understood the full scope of the deception. While the defending pilots had been fighting desperately to protect Mountain Ridge Base, the real critical systems had been safely hidden underground. The enemy attack was destroying nothing more valuable than concrete and metal. All aircraft, the base commander announced over the radio. Enemy attack has failed. Repeat, enemy attack has failed. Critical systems are secure and undamaged. The remaining enemy aircraft seemed to realize they had been tricked as they circled over the burning decoy facilities. Their mission had failed completely. They had lost over 30 aircraft while inflicting no significant damage on their actual target. Sarah landed hard in a mountain meadow, her parachute dragging her several feet across the rocky ground before she could release the harness. She was bruised and shaken but otherwise uninjured from her ejection. Alpha 1, this is Search and Rescue, came a voice over her survival radio. We have your position. Helicopter is inbound for pickup. As Sarah gathered her survival gear and prepared for rescue, she heard the sound of jet engines overhead. Looking up, she saw the surviving enemy aircraft fleeing toward the horizon, their mission a complete failure. Thunder leader to all aircraft. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled over the radio. Cease engagement. Let them go. We've won. Sarah sat down on a boulder and finally allowed herself to process what had just happened. The small group of defending pilots had faced impossible odds against a much larger enemy force. They had lost several aircraft and pilots, but they had successfully protected their objective through skill, courage, and careful planning by their commanders. The rescue helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, its crew chief helping Sarah aboard the aircraft. As they lifted off from the mountain meadow, she could see the smoke rising from Mountain Ridge Base in the distance. Empty buildings burning while the real facility remained safe underground. "Ma'am, you're going to be famous!" the crew chief shouted over the helicopter's rotor noise. "Word is you shot down 6 enemy aircraft single-handed and saved the base." Sarah shook her head and smiled tiredly. "It wasn't just me. Every pilot out there today was a hero. We all did our jobs." As the helicopter flew toward the medical facility, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had faced her greatest challenge as a pilot and proven herself in combat against overwhelming odds. More importantly, she had been part of a team that successfully defended their nation's critical assets. The aerial battle over Mountain Ridge Base would be remembered as one of the most decisive defensive actions in military history. A small force of determined pilots had faced down a massive enemy attack and emerged victorious through skill, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of teamwork. Sarah closed her eyes as exhaustion finally overtook her. She had survived her first major combat mission and helped save Mountain Ridge Base. Tomorrow there would be debriefings, medal ceremonies, and interviews with military historians. But today, she was simply a pilot who had done her duty when her country needed her most. The helicopter continued its flight through the mountain valleys, carrying Sarah away from the battlefield where she had proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes rise to meet the greatest challenges. Her story would inspire future generations of pilots, showing that courage and determination could overcome even impossible odds. In the end, it hadn't been advanced technology or superior numbers that won the battle. It had been the human spirit, the willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when everything they valued was at stake. Sarah Mitchell had risen to defend her nation's stronghold, and her actions would be remembered long after the smoke of battle had cleared from the mountain peaks.